What would a dog do if it waited for 4 years for its owner to come back? And when that moment finally comes, how can anyone hold back tears when they witness the reunion? What would you do if the person you loved most in the world suddenly disappeared without a trace? For Max, the golden retriever with eyes full of unconditional loyalty, the answer was simple: wait. But with each passing day, the waiting became harder, the uncertainty gnawed at him, and his patience was stretched thin. Max had been Emily's companion for as long as he could remember. From the moment she was born, he was there, by her side, through every milestone, every scraped knee, every tear, and every laugh. She had grown from a tiny, giggling baby into a young girl, but Max's love for her had only deepened. In his eyes, Emily was everything. She was his world. Their bond was special. Emily would always call his name with such excitement, and Max would come running, his tail wagging so hard it seemed as though he could fly. When she was sad, Max would gently nudge her with his nose, offering comfort and companionship. When she was happy, Max shared in that joy, running alongside her, playing fetch in the backyard, or simply lying on the couch with her, his head on her lap. But that world started to change when Emily began school. It wasn't an abrupt shift. It was gradual, like the seasons changing from spring to summer. She had always been the center of his life, the person who would scratch behind his ears and play with him in the garden. But now, she was leaving the house more, spending hours at school, and hanging out with friends. Max didn't mind, he understood. People grew up, and he was proud to watch Emily become more independent. But no matter how much he tried to understand, something felt off. Max had always been a creature of routine, and he found comfort in it. Every day, he would wait for Emily to return home, pacing by the front door in anticipation. Her absence was becoming longer, and the once familiar sound of the school bus pulling up to their driveway grew more distant. He would wait by the window, his eyes fixed on the street, hoping to see her small figure running toward the house. He knew she would come back eventually, and when she did, the house would once again come alive with the sound of her laughter. But things were different now. Max could feel that IT started with the small things. Emily's footsteps no longer echoed through the hallway as loudly as they used to. Her voice, once filled with excitement when she walked through the door, was quieter now. She was always so busy, going out with friends, staying late at school for projects, and leaving Max behind. She would give him a pat on the head or a quick scratch behind the ears, but it wasn't the same. She wasn't there like she used to be. Max tried to ignore it at first. After all, it was normal for kids to grow up, to become more independent. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. His instincts told him that Emily wasn't just busy. No, there was something deeper at play. And it wasn't just the fact that she was getting older. It was the sense that he was being left behind. His world, his constant, loving Emily, was slowly drifting away from him, and it tore at his heart. One evening, Max waited by the door like he always did, tail wagging as the sun began to set. He could hear the faint sound of footsteps in the distance. Was it Emily? His heart raced with anticipation. But as the minutes stretched on, those footsteps never grew louder. No key jingled in the door. No familiar voice called out to him. It was quiet. Too quiet that Max's patience never faltered, though. Every day, at the same time, he would take his place by the window and wait. His ears perked at the sound of the front door opening, the faintest sign that she was home. But it never came. As the hours ticked by and the sun began to set, Max's tail would lower in disappointment. Emily was still nowhere to be found. The routine was the same. He waited and waited, but there was no sign of Emily. Max had always been a dog of instinct. He could sense when something was off, when something wasn't right. He had spent so many years with Emily, watching her grow, that he could tell when her energy shifted. The longer he waited, the more certain he became that something was terribly wrong. It wasn't like Emily to stay out this long, especially without giving him some sign of where she was. She always came back home, and if she was late, she would at least let someone know. But now there was nothing. No phone call, no message, just silence. The next day, the same thing happened. Max waited, his eyes glued to the door, his ears straining for the sound of Emily's voice. But once again, the minutes turned into hours, and the door remained closed. Max's stomach twisted with a mixture of confusion and fear. He couldn't understand it. Why wasn't she home? Why wasn't she coming back? As the days turned into weeks, Max's worry deepened. He spent hours each day waiting for Emily to walk through that door. He tried everything he could think of. He scratched at the door. He barked. He paced back and forth in agitation. But nothing seemed to make her come home. He couldn't understand why she wasn't returning to him. It wasn't like her to disappear for so long. Something was wrong, and Max could feel it in his bones. His nights were the worst. The house, once filled with the sound of Emily's voice, was now eerily quiet. Max would lie in his bed, staring at the door, waiting for a sound that never came. He could no longer hear her footsteps echoing through the hallway, the familiar rustling of her backpack as she came home from school. The silence was suffocating, and it made Max's heart ache in ways he never thought possible. But Max wasn't one to give up easily. His loyalty to Emily was unwavering. He had waited for her before, and he would wait for her again. The hope that she would come home someday kept him going, even when every ounce of his being screamed that something was wrong. Max didn't know what had happened, but he would wait for as long as it took. He couldn't imagine a world without Emily in it.so. Day after day, Max waited, and the wait seemed endless. But the question remained, where was Emily? Why wasn't she coming home? Max had always been the kind of dog who trusted his instincts. He could read Emily's mood with a mere glance, understanding when she was happy, sad, or upset, and adjusting his behavior accordingly. He could feel the change in the air before any of the humans could, sensing when something was different. But the feeling that had settled in his chest in the days after Emily's disappearance was something Max couldn't explain. It wasn't just worry or confusion. It was dread. He had spent every waking moment by the window, watching for any sign of her, hoping that one day she would walk through the door again, smiling, as if nothing had changed. But with each passing day, that hope began to fade, replaced by a gnawing feeling that something far worse had happened. Max had always been patient, but the silence had worn him thin. The house felt wrong without Emily's presence. He missed the way she would call his name with that bright, unmistakable joy in her voice. He missed the sound of her footsteps as they echoed through the hallway, followed by the familiar shuffle of her shoes on the floor. It wasn't the same. The house felt hollow, the quiet almost suffocating, and Max was starting to fear that he might never hear those sounds again. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something far beyond what he had understood. He had been a loyal companion to Emily for years, always there when she needed him. But now he was alone, and the thought of that made him ache. Max wasn't just waiting anymore. He was searching point one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the shadows grew long. Max's instincts led him to a new course of action. He had waited long enough. The door, which he had once stood guard by, seemed to mock him now. Max knew he couldn't just wait around anymore. He needed to find Emily. That he trotted to the door and scratched at it with a sense of urgency he had never felt before. His paw scraped against the wood, the sound of it echoing through the empty house. Max barked, but no one responded. The house was still as silent as it had been for days. His heart sank, but he didn't give up. He paced around the living room, his paws clicking against the hardwood floor as he tried to think of what to do next. Max's keen sense of smell kicked into gear. Maybe there was something he could track, something that would lead him back to Emily. He padded across the room, his nose twitching as he sniffed around. He caught a faint whiff of something familiar, her scent. Emily's scent. His ears perked up, and for a moment, hope flared in his chest. Could it be? Was this the sign he had been waiting for? Max followed the trail, his heart racing with excitement. He sniffed the ground, following the faint traces of Emily's presence. His body moved faster, the hope of finding her pushing him forward. The scent grew stronger as he moved through the house, down the hall, and into the kitchen. But there was no sign of Emily, no indication of where she had gone. Max's heart sank again. Suddenly, his eyes landed on the doorway to the garage. The faintest hint of Emily's scent lingered in the air, leading him to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had been there. Max's pulse quickened, his paws shuffling in excitement. Could she have gone out to the car? Maybe she had been out somewhere. and he had missed her? He darted to the garage, his nose leading the way. His breath came in sharp, quick bursts as he neared the door. Max's instincts told him that whatever was happening, he was getting closer to the truth. He could feel it in his bones. With a soft whine, Max pawed at the garage door, his nails scraping against the wood as he tried to push it open. But the door was locked, just like it had always been. Max let out a frustrated bark and backed away for a moment. He stood there, his head tilting to one side, trying to figure out what to do next. That's when he heard a faint sound coming from the other side of the door. A rustling, followed by a soft, low voice. It was too quiet for Max to make out the words, but the sound made his ears prick up. His tail stood still, his body frozen in place as he focused all his attention on the sound. Max's heart pounded in his chest. Was it Emily? He couldn't be sure, but his instincts told him to be cautious. Slowly, he moved back toward the door, his body tense with anticipation. Max stood there listening, waiting. Whatever was on the other side of that door could hold the answers he so desperately sought. But as he waited, his mind raced with questions. What was happening? Where was Emily? Why had she gone away without a word? And why did everything feel so wrong? Max's eyes darted around the room, looking for any clue that would help him understand what was going on. His heart was heavy, weighed down by the uncertainty that seemed to surround him. He had always been the one who protected Emily, the one who made sure she was safe, the one who comforted her when she was scared. But now, in the silence of the house, it was Max who was scared. He was alone, left to fend for himself in a world that suddenly felt unfamiliar. The weight was unbearable. But it wasn't just the waiting anymore. Max needed answers. He needed to know what had happened to the girl he loved more than anything. He couldn't sit idly by, hoping for a miracle to bring her home. He needed to find her, no matter the cost. Have you ever waited for something so long that you began to wonder if it would ever come to pass? Max had waited for days, then weeks, but the thought of giving up never crossed his mind. There was a powerful force inside him, something more than loyalty, more than love. It was the unshakable belief that Emily would return. He didn't know how, and he didn't know when, but he believed. And for Max, belief was enough. The house was silent once again, but this time, there was something different about it. Max could feel a shift in the air. A faint smell, just barely there but unmistakable, hit his nose as he walked through the living room. Emily's scent. It was the first time he had smelled it so strongly in days. His heart raced, and his paws moved without thinking, as if guided by some invisible force. Could it be? Could she be back? Max's breath quickened as he trotted to the door, ears alert, tail still. He pressed his nose against the cold wood, inhaling deeply. He was sure of it now. She was close. The scent was fresh, and the hope that had once been a small ember inside him flared up, burning with intensity. He didn't know how, but Emily was near. It was time. Without hesitation, Max scratched at the door again, his paws frantic with urgency. This time, there was no hesitation. There was no quiet, defeated waiting. There was only the fierce desire to find her, to be with her again. He knew he couldn't waste another moment. He had waited for so long, but now was the moment that everything would change. The door creaked open slowly, and Max's eyes widened as he caught sight of her. There she was, Emily. For a heartbeat, time stood still. Emily stood in the doorway, looking just as she had the day she had last left. Her hair was a little longer, her face a little older, but to Max, she was still his Emily. His girl, the one who had always been by his side, the one he had waited for through it all. That Max's heart swelled with a joy he could never have described. His tail wagged frantically as he leaped toward her, his body trembling with excitement. It was her. She was here. She had come back. But Emily didn't move at first. She stood there, her eyes wide in shock as she looked at Max. Max, panting with joy, nudged her gently with his nose, his tail wagging so hard that he almost lost his balance. Emily reached down, her hands shaking as she ran her fingers through his fur. For a moment, there was nothing but silence between them, as if the world had disappeared, and it was just the two of them, reunited at last. Max, Emily whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I thought I lost you. Max licked her hand, his body pressed close to hers, as if trying to reassure her that he had never left. He had never given up, and now he was right here, by her side, where he belonged. But as Emily looked down at him, something in her eyes changed. There was a sadness there, a deep, aching sadness that Max couldn't understand. He tilted his head, his ears drooping slightly, sensing that something wasn't right. "I'm so sorry, Max," Emily continued, her voice barely audible. "I should have come home sooner. I didn't mean for you to wait. I never wanted you to feel like this." Max didn't know what she meant. All he knew was that she was here now. She was safe, and he was with her again. He didn't need to understand why she had been gone or where she had been. All that mattered was that they were together, and that was enough. Emily sank to her knees, her hands trembling as she hugged Max tightly. "I didn't know how much I needed you until I came back," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I thought I could live without you, but I was wrong. I'll never leave you again, I promise." Max felt her tears on his fur, warm and salty, as he nuzzled her face with his nose. It was then that he realized, for the first time, that Emily had needed him just as much as he had needed her. They were not just two beings in the same house. They were a team, a bond forged in love, trust, and a shared sense of belonging. Max had waited for her for so long, and now, finally, it had paid off. But this reunion, this moment, was more than just a return. It was the beginning of something new, something even stronger than before. It was a bond that could never be broken, no matter the distance, no matter the time. The days of waiting were over. And as Max lay by Emily's side that night, his head resting on her lap, he knew one thing for sure. No matter what came next, they would face it together. Forever.